My name is Evelyn, I am 34, and I learned to be useful before I learned to ask for help. Tonight I set the table at my parents' place, napkins folded like little boats, when my mother slid an envelope beside my plate. 40,000, she said. Cosign for your nephew. I looked at the dining room clock. I already had a ticket in my purse. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Tap like and subscribe and walk with me into what happened. I grew up believing that the person who moved quietly and fixed things would always have a seat at the table. At 15, I took a job at a roadside diner where the bell over the door rang with every gust of dust and heat. Ryan, the manager, with a patient posture and clean ledger lines, taught me to count a till by hand. The register drawer smelled faintly of coins and sugar. I kept my tips in an old jelly jar under my bed, the glass cloudy from years of peanut butter labels that never fully scrubbed off. The first time I opened that jar and found enough bills for a graphing calculator, I felt taller without growing an inch. Senior year, the counselor sent me to a financial aid office at the community college. The room hummed like a copier. A poster about opportunity peeled at one corner. A woman slid forms across the desk and explained subsidized and unsubsidized loans, grace periods, and interest that compounded like small weather inside a purse. I signed lines without ceremony and walked out carrying a packet that would become $60,000 of debt with my name on every page. It did not feel like a chain. It felt like a bridge that I would have to carry plank by plank. My brother Michael left for a state school the next year. Our parents paid his tuition and surprised him with a used sedan in December, a ribbon tied on the hood like a temporary crown. When he graduated and interned, they floated his rent for half a year so he could get his footing without wobble. None of this was sinister. They believed in visible promise, and the promise they recognized looked like a sun in a button-down going somewhere fast. They told me to be practical to help to understand. I did. I was good at it. At 21, I moved into my first apartment with a mattress on the floor and a secondhand lamp that buzzed when the bulb warmed. The kitchen was a counter with a sink that rattled when water ran, and I studied there at night with rice and eggs and a chipped blue mug from the diner days that fit my hand like it was built for it. I worked at a logistics company and discovered I could calm a warehouse as quarter end rolled in like thunder. When trucks lined up wrong and manifests doubled back on themselves, someone would ask where Evelyn was, and I would appear with a clipboard and a voice that made people put down whatever they were about to throw. Claire came into my life around then. She worked in another department, a person with steady eyes who asked the kind of small questions that hold a person together. We shared lunches on a bench behind the loading dock where the air smelled like cardboard and diesel. I watched her say no to extra work without apology. She showed me that competence could include boundaries, although I would not be ready for that lesson for a while. Paying my loans did not make a story anyone else wanted to hear. It made a life. 19 meant declining a weekend trip so I could make a minimum payment that felt anything but minimum. 22 meant skipping a friend's gift to afford a used couch with cushions that did not sag like resignation. 27 meant a surprise dental bill and a call to the office to ask about a 0% plan that required me to remember dates as if they were birthdays. At 31, I made the last student loan payment in winter air that tasted clean as if the sky had been washed. I bought a candle with a scent called Early Snow and did not tell anyone. I let the flames stand in for a speech I never gave. I kept the chipped blue mug through every move, a small relic of a time when I counted cash in a back room and learned that earning and being seen are not the same thing. That mug would travel with me to the moment when the envelope slid across a table and the old family playbook tried to write me into a margin again. I did not know yet what I would do, only that I could feel a boundary forming like a shoreline around my ribs. My mother called the week before and asked if I could come for dinner, and please bring my lemon pie because Dad loved it and had been talking about it. Her tone was warm, the kind that sits on the windowsill and makes the room look the same as always. I agreed and squeezed lemons after work, the zest climbing the air. I arrived that evening and stepped onto the porch where the light hummed like it always had. Inside, the bowl by the door held keys the way it always did, and the hallway carried the milestones that always have a place. Framed photos lined the walls in order that put my brother in the center of every big day, his grin paired with college colors, a cake, a car. I was always there on the edge of the frame, holding a platter or a trash bag, useful and slightly out of focus. In the kitchen, my mother smoothed the tablecloth twice, a small tell she never recognized. She set out the blue sugar bowl with a tiny chip along its rim, a twin to the one on my mug. The house smelled like roast chicken and green beans and the yeasty comfort of crescent rolls. I placed the lemon pie on a trivet and washed my hands, staring for an extra second at my reflection in the dark oval of the window. Behind me, the dining room clock ticked with the soft insistence of an old habit. Michael came with Ariana and their son Tyler, who offered quick nods. His eyes dipped under the corner of a hoodie, earbuds tucked like he wished the room were quieter. Michael breezed in, already talking about interest rates and good timing, how money has a way of multiplying when you show it confidence. He clapped Dad on the shoulder and dropped his keys in the bowl with a clink, like punctuation. We sat. My mother asked about work, and I told a small story about a truck that missed a gate and how we rerouted without losing an hour. Michael smiled at me with the old brotherly affection that always carried a second edge. He said, "You always have the cleanest credit," Ev, like it was a compliment and an accusation. Dad nodded, pleased, not seeing the way that sentence fell against my chest like a number carved into a desk. We passed the rolls. I watched the clock because I had already checked in for a flight, a secret that sat in my purse like a folded map. I had taken a transfer and bought a one-way ticket for later that night to a city where Claire had a spare room and my company had an office with a messy process I knew how to untangle. It was a move I had planned quietly with the same focus I used during inventory audits. Room by room, I had packed my life into boxes of what would come and what would rest. My mother set a thick envelope beside my plate so gently the table did not even notice. My name was on the front in her careful script that tried not to waver. The room shifted a degree, I could feel in my jaw. For a moment, no one spoke. The napkin in my lap was folded like a small boat that did not yet know which water it would meet. My mother said it as if she were asking for salt. It would just be a formality to help Tyler start strong. The amount was $40,000 for the first year, enough to cover tuition and books and maybe a used car to get him to classes on the days buses ran late. She said it would make her sleep better to know that we were all in this together. Her voice made the word together sound like a quilt large enough to cover a house. Dad added a story about his brother who co-signed for him decades ago so he could finish a certification in a year when work hours got cut, and everything felt slippery. "Family lifts family," he said. And the phrase was so practiced it came out polished. He looked happy to tell it again, and I did not want to take that away from him. Michael had prepared. He pulled a spreadsheet from a folder and talked through rows like a coach drawing plays. Tuition fees, lab costs, a meal plan, a budget for refilling a transit card, the neighborhood cost of a small room if Tyler left dorms after freshman year. He had already researched a lender with an easy online portal. Ariana had looked up the correct spelling of my middle name and pre-filled the application so I would not have to type it at the table. Ariana rested her hand on the edge of the folder as if to keep it from sliding. On the top page, a faint brown circle marked where a coffee cup had once rested. The paper had been read and reread before the chicken came out of the oven. At my place, setting a pen lay where a knife would normally sit. My mother had put it there absent-mindedly, I told myself. Or maybe she had done it on purpose and told herself it was absent-minded. Either way, the pen waited like a small instrument for carving consent. They spoke in turns that overlapped and lifted a choir of reason. Ariana said that with my stable job this was nothing, and that beyond the paper it was about belief in a good kid. Tyler kept his eyes near the plate, a boy whose quiet did not mean absence. I asked about his plan. Had he applied for scholarships? Did he know about work study? Had he talked to the community college about a transfer pathway that could cut costs without cutting future options? Michael sat straighter. He wanted Tyler to have the freshman dorm experience like he did with a roommate who became a groomsman and a campus that felt like a world. He did not mean harm. He meant memory. He wanted to pass down what had been given to him without naming who had paid for it. In the hum of all that talk, a long memory answered back in me. 19 meant saying no so I could pay a bill that wore a name I signed without a witness. 22 meant holding my breath over a used couch and teaching myself to live with threads that already frayed. 27 meant writing down a plan for a dental bill in a lined notebook like a promise to a stranger. 31 meant standing in winter air with a receipt in my pocket that did not show in any photograph. When I looked at the envelope, I saw not just paper but years. Dad said we have always done right by you, and I understood then a truth I had known so well I forgot to name it. They had always done what they knew. What they knew did not include my needs. I could see a ledger forming in the air that did not belong to me. I could also see the clock. The hands moved the way they always moved and never asked permission. I did not argue. I did not assemble exhibit after exhibit from my life and lay them out like evidence on a bright table. I listened. I took a long breath and felt how a yes would sit in my body. Then I set the rest of the evening in motion with the calm that has saved more than one warehouse on a frantic day. We ate dessert like we always did. My lemon pie wobbled a little where the filling had not fully set sunlight on a puddle. My mother cut slices that were not equal. The largest landed on Michael's plate without any performance. Habit is a river that carves stone while believing itself a trickle. Tyler whispered thank you after his first bite, a soft thread that tied him to me more than anyone knew. I put my napkin on the table, as neat as when I had folded it, a little boat now docked. My voice was clear where my heart had once made fog. I said I will not co-sign. The room inhaled and did not know what to do with the air. Dad blinked like a light catching. Michael laughed once, as if it were a joke I would pull back any second. Ariana's mouth became a straight line that wanted a ruler. My mother asked why in a voice that folded into itself as if trying to become smaller than the question it was carrying. I did not list a ledger of what I had already paid. I did not explain the difference between love and credit or between help and debt. I picked up the envelope with my name and put it back in my mother's hands so gently the paper did not bend. I said I needed to get going before traffic made the drive to the airport unkind. I stood and felt old threads loosen without breaking. My purse held the next chapter. My boarding pass sat ready on my phone. A small notebook held a short list for the move. And wrapped in a dish towel was my chipped blue mug, the relic of long shifts and coins with heat on them. I had packed it last because it felt like carrying an earlier self without making her lift again. Outside the porch, light hummed. The air smelled like cut grass. I ordered a ride and stood on the small square of concrete where I had stood 1,000 times before a person who had handed out slices and taken plates with the same motion. My phone vibrated. Michael sent a string of messages that tried charm first and then turned. I let them pass by like a bus I did not need. In the car, the driver asked which airline and I told him without having to clear my throat. As the city went by in a wash of lights, I typed a message to my parents that thanked my mother for the dinner and thanked my father for stories he told that taught me to try. I wrote that I loved them and that I would not be discussing co-signing anymore. It was 3 lines that fit in my palm better than any long explanation. When I hit send, the gesture felt like placing a box on a shelf where it could rest without sliding open. At the airport, I sat under a gate sign and wrapped my hands around a paper cup of tea as if it had heat enough to steady a person. Messages stacked up on my lock screen. I did not open them. I watched people roll their suitcases and guessed at their stories without making any of them mine. When my flight number flashed blue, I called Claire. She answered on the first ring. She did not ask for the blow-by-blow. She asked if I had eaten. I told her about the pie, and she laughed the kind of laugh that makes a thin day widen. We went over the plan one more time. She had made up the spare room for 2 weeks. I would start at the new office Monday. She would meet me with a spare key and a grocery list. She reminded me to breathe when I did not realize I had forgotten how. In the cabin, the lights dimmed to a low gold that made the wingtips look like pencils drawing lines through the dark. I slept in small circles and woke to a river etched below like a ribbon that refused to tangle. Dawn cracked open somewhere without making a sound. I thought about the envelope and felt an odd gratitude for how clearly it showed me a door and a knob and a hand that knew what to do. The bus from the airport hissed at each stop and I pressed my knees against my suitcase so it would not roll. Claire's building smelled like paint that had dried in winter. The spare room held a bed made with hospital corners and a small plant in a chipped pot that matched my mug in spirit, if not in shape. I showered and put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and slept until afternoon, made the blinds bright. When I woke, I did the practical things that tell your insides you mean it. I placed a credit freeze with all 3 bureaus and ordered my free credit report to check for any inquiry I did not recognize. I filed a request to forward my mail and rented a post office box, so documents had a steady home. I walked down to a discount store and bought a plain white mug. Back in the room, I set the chipped blue mug on a shelf and told it quietly that it could rest now. I did not need it to hold anything heavy for me anymore. That night, I ate soup with Claire and told her the outline and left out what did not need saying. We watched a show where people fixed houses by deciding walls were not fate. Claire handed me a blanket and I felt something settle that had been rattling my whole life. The sound was so new I did not recognize it as my own. Saying no did not make me a desert. I wrote to Tyler and told him I believed in him. I wrote that I would not co-sign and that I would help him find aid that did not trap anyone. I sent links to the federal application for aid and to local scholarships from clubs that have names no one remembers until they hand you a check for books. I described the community college transfer pathway in plain sentences and told him I would read essays if he wanted another set of eyes. I did not talk about values like a sermon. I talked about steps like a map. At my new office, I met with human resources to confirm my transfer. My role moved me into process improvement, the quiet bones of how a day becomes work. I spent a morning watching a workflow that looked like untied shoelaces and drew it on paper until the loops made sense. People from the warehouse nodded in a way that told me they were not being polite. That week, we fixed a bottleneck that had cost overtime every Friday for a year. The spreadsheet that tracked that cost sat at the end of a hallway, and I walked down to it like it was a small altar to sanity. On Saturday mornings, Claire and I walked to a market where peaches leaned against one another and the air smelled like sweet and wet. We talked about boundaries and the urge to keep proving worth until you are too tired to enjoy the proof. Sometimes we did not talk at all. We stood in line for coffee and watched a woman choose flowers, and I thought about how beauty can be built from stems that people cut on purpose. My mother called after a week. The hello was stiff. She asked if I had arrived safely and if my new office had windows. I told her it did, and that the light came in sideways at 4. She asked about dinner, and I said it was good. She circled the topic like a nervous plane. I said 2 sentences that were the only ones that mattered. I love you. I will not discuss co-signing again. She exhaled and said she understood, even if she did not agree. I believed both parts. Michael sent a message about loyalty that used words like family and duty and replayed a tape that had been recorded before we were born. I did not reply. A week later, Tyler wrote to say he had enrolled at the community college near their house, that he found a part-time job at a hardware store, and that the scholarship essay template I sent fit even after he changed every example to make it his own. He thanked me in a way that made me put my phone down and sit with the quiet for a minute. I opened a high-yield savings account and named it Future Ease. A small automatic transfer left each paycheck like a soft habit. I signed up for therapy through company benefits because I wanted to practice saying needs out loud without apologizing at the end. The sessions felt like learning a new language where you start with nouns and only later risk the verbs. Each week, I could feel a new piece of furniture slide into place inside me. A year to the week, I drove back to my parents' town with a store-bought pie in a cardboard box and the new white mug wrapped in a dish towel. The old blue mug stayed on my shelf at home where it could do the job it had earned, which was simply to exist without being asked to hold heat. The porch light hummed the same note it had hummed my whole life. My mother opened the door and her face did not perform. It just softened. She took the pie and said, "We still have that sugar bowl, you know, the one with the chip," as if naming a chip could fix everything the way naming a star helps keep a sailor straight. Dinner felt calmer. Dad asked about work, and I showed him a simple process diagram I had sketched for a team training. He studied it longer than he studied most things, and said, well, that meant respect had climbed the stairs to meet me. Michael kept his voice even and chose small talk like he was trying on a different shirt. Progress is not always a parade. Sometimes, it is a door that does not slam. Tyler joined us by video from a dorm room at the state school he was set to transfer into after 2 years of paying his way and applying for aid. He was there for a summer bridge program that brought future transfers to campus early, with housing, in the same buildings they would later call home. He sat on a narrow bed with cinder block walls behind him and smiled like someone who had put down a weight without dropping it on anyone's foot. He talked about classes and the hardware store manager who had written him a recommendation. He thanked me again without making it a ceremony, and I told him he had done the work, which was the truth. After dinner, I stood on the porch and watched the sky turn the color of a bruise healing. The same light hummed and the neighborhood drifted into evening with the small sounds of sprinklers and a dog shaking water from its coat. Inside the house, the clock ticked the same rhythm it had always kept. I remembered the napkins I folded that night, little boats lined up as if they knew a tide was coming. I thought about the envelope and the pen laid where a knife would be and the way a person can refit a room without moving a single chair. Here is what that night taught me once I had air again. The ticket in my purse was not an escape from family. It was permission to choose a table where I am not asked to pay twice for belonging. Love without boundaries becomes debt. Love with boundaries becomes trust. I will come back when I can offer what I choose, not what is demanded. I learned to fold my own small boat and launch it, and to step away before the clock tells me to disappear. If any part of this story reflects a moment you have lived, tell me in the comments about the boundary you drew without anger. Tap like if you want more stories told with steady truth. Subscribe to stay close as new chapters arrive. Share this with someone who needs a clear map out of a tight room. Thank you for listening, and may your week be gentle where it can be and strong where it has to be.